Hello and welcome to this week's video lecture on delivering negative messages. Upon completion of this module, students will be able to explain the goals to work toward when delivering negative messages, discern when to use direct and indirect strategies in delivering negative messages, and recognize message structures for communicating bad news. Delivering bad news is not an easy communication task. When you do it effectively, it can foster improved relationships and open lines of communication. Here are some goals for delivering negative news. Explain clearly and completely. Your message should be clear enough that the reader understands and, in the best case, accepts the bad news. Your reader should not need to follow up for clarification. Project a professional image. Always remember to keep calm, be polite, and clearly explain why this negative message is needed. This is especially true when dealing with readers who are upset, threatening, or overstating their claims. Convey empathy and sensitivity. It is always easier to accept bad news if it is delivered gently. Use language that respects the reader and attempts to reduce bad feelings. Where appropriate, take responsibility and apologize. This goes a long way in soothing upset feelings. Remember to be careful not to create a situation of legal liability for you or your company. Don't make any promises you can't keep. Be fair. In your message, show that the decision was fair, impartial, and rational. People accept bad news better if they feel they were treated fairly. Maintain friendly relations. Show your reader that you want to continue having pleasant relations. Make an effort to regain their confidence. These goals are not always easy to achieve, but practice makes perfect, and with experience, you'll be able to work toward these to meet the needs of your readers and your organization. In any negative situation, you can choose between two strategies for delivering bad news. The direct strategy gets right to the point and tells the reader the bad news. The indirect strategy builds up to the bad news in order to soften the blow. Some critics suggest that people are too impatient, skeptical, and cynical for the indirect strategy to be useful. But many communicators feel that bad news is a bit easier to accept if the reasons are provided first. How can you choose which strategy is appropriate? First, you need to consider how your reader is likely to react. Second, consider how bad the news is. When should we use a direct strategy for delivering bad news? When the bad news is not damaging. If the bad news is insignificant, like a small cost increase, and doesn't personally affect the reader, use a direct strategy. When the receiver may overlook the bad news. If you're informing a reader about changes in service, new policy requirements, or legal announcements, it's best to use a direct strategy. These routine administrative messages are often skimmed through, and if the point is not in the first few lines, it may be lost. When the organization or receiver prefers directness. Some companies and individuals expect all messages and announcements, even bad news, to be straightforward and presented without frills. Make sure you know your corporate culture and your reader. When firmness is necessary. Messages that must show determination and strength should not use delaying techniques. For example, the last in a series of collection letters that seek payment of an overdue bill will require a direct opening. Here's a simple pattern for using the direct strategy for bad news. In the opening of your message, simply state the bad news, clearly and politely. In the body of your message, provide the reasons and rationale behind this negative news. Include a pleasant, polite closing to continue fostering a positive relationship with your reader. When should we use an indirect strategy for delivering bad news? When the bad news is personally upsetting. If the negative news involves the receiver personally, such as a layoff notice, the indirect strategy makes sense. Telling an employee that they no longer have a job is best done in person, and usually you will want to outline the reasons first. If a company has made a mistake that inconveniences or disadvantages a customer, the indirect strategy is also often better. When the bad news will provoke a hostile reaction. If your message will anger or annoy your reader, use the indirect method. By providing reasons before the bad news, you are establishing common ground, encouraging the reader to hear you out before you give them the bad news. In these situations, a direct message might make the reader stop reading. When the bad news threatens the customer relationship. If the negative message may damage a relationship with a customer, the indirect strategy can help to salvage that bond. Starting slowly and giving reasons that explain what happened can be more helpful than simply announcing the bad news or inadequately explaining the reasons. When the bad news is unexpected. Readers who are surprised by bad news tend to have a more negative reaction than those who expected it. For example, if a company suddenly closes an office or branch, that bad news might be better received if the reasoning is explained first. The indirect approach does not guarantee that readers will be pleased, but many communicators still prefer it because it can be an effective way to soften the blow of negative news. Here's a simple pattern for using the indirect strategy for bad news. In the opening of your message, identify the challenges faced. This will vary from situation to situation, but the goal is to establish common ground with your reader. In the body of your message, provide the reasons and rationale to explain influences shaping the situation or decision. End by clearly stating the negative news or decision. Remember to be polite, respectful, and sympathetic throughout your message to continue fostering a positive relationship with your reader. As we wrap up this video lecture on delivering negative messages, take a moment to reflect on your own experiences. When have you had to deliver bad news? What strategy did you use? What was your reader or audience's reaction? What could you have done differently? You've now reached the end of this lesson. Please return to the online module for more activities and resources.